So now first I'll give the floor to our director of the complex system studies. By the way, I'm the coordinator of the complex system studies. I'm Qing Yifeng. And Hank, we're going to introduce some of these setups of the complex system. Hank, it's your floor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kinji, and everybody welcome to this sort of start of the Complexaton event. First of all, thanks to all the people who suggested, challenges, but also people who attend this meeting. I go quickly through, the Center for Complex System Studies, which organizes this Complexaton, and then give an overview on, what will be our workflow over the whole project. So the Center for Complex System Studies was founded in 2018, and it's basically an interdisciplinary center to promote use of complex systems, techniques, and concepts to a diversity of problems, scientific and also societal challenging. The current organization is that I'm a director at the moment, and we have a board of 4 people, which are listed here. Deb Panja from Computer Science, Gerard Barkema from the Science Faculties, the Vice Dean of Education, and then Koen Teulings from Rebo, from Economics, and Robert McDonald is our Outreach Coordinator. And as you've already seen, Qingji Feng is our coordinator, and she will sort of lead the whole kickoff meeting today. Now, what is our community? Well, we have members. So we have now about 40 associate members, so that's more on the sort of senior level. So those are assistant professor to full professors of different faculties in the Utrecht University. Then we have junior members, which are postdocs and PhDs. And then we have 10 external members at the moment, which are from outside of Utrecht University. And our email list, sort of increases. About 600 people we reach with all emails, which are sent around by mostly by Qingji. So there's, of course, a lot of challenges, and I'm not going to list here, what are sort of the main societal challenges, but there's a diagram here of the Sustainable Development Goals, which gives you, of course, a sort of glimpse on what are the challenges. These are, of course, attacked by a multitude of, say, approaches. And our angle is, of course, to bring in, the sort of, as I said, concepts and also techniques from complex system science, which are all gathered in this diagram here. Networks, for instance, nonlinear dynamics, pattern formation, all those kind of techniques, to give maybe a complementary view, sometimes, additional view, sometimes a very new view on current challenges in society. And so that's why we sort of started the Complexaton. And the principle is very simple. We have several challenges, and 7 will be presented by a diverse set of people later this afternoon. We'll get a few teams which addresses, say, these challenges. So each team will address one challenge. The results eventually, and I'll go through that later, what results have to be generated. They will be evaluated by a jury. We haven't fixed the jury yet, but that will be probably scientists from outside of the UU, certainly, but outside of Europe, outside of the Netherlands also, to have, quite a distant evaluation of project results. And we have a reasonable cash prize, €1,000, which will be cash without tax deduction, just for the winning team. So what are the criteria? This is how we instruct the jury to look at, this what is produced by the teams. So there could be a very original solution suggested. So that is one of the sort of criteria. Then it's of course, the progress on solving the challenge. And it's based on the 2 aspects. One is the final report, which is going to be generated by the team. And the second is also the feedback from the representative, which is associated, which will present the challenge. And then we have also, eventually, we have a presentation, which will also, be important for sort of ranking the different teams. Then there's several conditions we have to put up. We exclusively have the teams composed of master students and PhD students. They can be in principle from every Dutch university, but we require that the team should be led by one of the master or PhD candidates from Utrecht University. Then we limit the maximum number of participants by 4 per team, and each participant can only participate in one team. That's somehow the conditions for the formation of the teams. Then what timeline do we have? Well, we have this kickoff meeting now, so that's November 16. Then after this meeting, we'll hope that teams will form, and we'll put a registration deadline of 1st of December. So that will be a web form which has to be filled in, and it will be emailed to you. And then the idea is that the teams will be assigned to preferred challenges. I mean, depending on number of teams, right? If we get too many, then we have to find a solution for which team is going to do which challenge. But I guess from the number of people who attend now, I mean, that probably will not occur. So we hope we'll find 7 teams addressing the 7 challenges, and let's see if that will work at the end. Then we have a midterm sort of reporting, which will also be public and of course online. So where feedback is required from the community, interested community. So also hopefully a lot of people associated with the CCSS, with the Complex Systems Center. And then March 14 we'll have the deadline, so of the final reports. And then we'll have in April we have the final presentations, where also the jury will be present. And also we'll then, announce the prizes, which will also be a public event. Now, that brings me to sort of the last 2 challenges, and I just list them here. And of course, we will keep this sequence in presentations. You see that there's very diversity of challenges. This is the first 3, and these are the next 4, going from, chemistry, economics combined with climate, pollution. So really different challenges. And we hope that, the presenters can inspire PhD students and master students to really work on those, and also hopefully, with this complex system approach, create a sort of new line of work or a solution to a specific problem. So yeah, from my side, I wish you much success, and I guess for questions you can always reach us at ccss.uu.nl for further questions you might have at this point. And so with this, I'll give the back to Chinji.
Yeah, thank you very much, Henk. And for further questions, of course, you can send me an email, and you also can. I just posted on the chat. Probably some of you can see that. So we have a Slack workspace. You also can post your general question there. I also could answer from there. So now we quickly proceed to the first representative. That's the Dr. Gideon Krusman, and he's going to introduce his project to you. And Gideon, can you share the screen?
Yes, I can. Hold on a second.
Yeah.
Yep. There we go. Yep. Oh, something went wrong there. Let me try again.
Okay.
Right. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay.
And the floor is yours.
Yep. Okay, I'm going to keep it brief. I work for the International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center, based in Mexico. It's part of a consortium of international agricultural research institutes, working with a total budget of about $1 billion. The whole consortium. We are one of the larger centers, and we develop new technologies for maize and wheat, the staple food for 2/3 of the world population. the impact areas that the CGIAR, the Consortium of International Agricultural Research Institutes, has is to address issues around climate adaptation and mitigation, around nutrition, health, and food security, around poverty reduction, livelihoods and jobs, around gender equality, youth and social inclusion, and around environmental health and biodiversity, focused on the low and lower middle income countries around the globe. The problem that we are facing is that if we want to provide the growing population with healthy, affordable, and socially acceptable diets while staying within planetary boundaries, which is aggravated with climate change, we are facing a huge challenge. And so we're dealing with addressing numerous of the Sustainable Development Goals, which Henk already mentioned in his introduction, there are a lot of trade-offs. But the problem is we do not want to have trade-offs, but we want to have a win-win situation where we actually stay within our planetary boundaries while creating economic and social welfare for as many people as possible. And this is the challenge is especially large in low and lower middle income countries, where affordability is a major issue. Around healthy diets, there is lots of suggestions have been made. For instance, last year the Eat Lancet Commission came up with a whole set of things for around sustainable healthy diets. The only problem was they were not affordable. And so these discussions around this topic are really filled with a lot of emotion. While there is really a big need for scientific evidence of what works and what doesn't work. So to take that issue around providing things that people need while staying within planetary boundaries, that is really complex. That's really complex, and it's captured in this donut figure developed by Rayworth. The challenge that we're putting forward in the Complexaton challenge is that there is ample data available from many different sources on the separate components of dynamic complex agri-food systems. Bringing them together to provide insights about the food system transformation pathways is really challenging. The data is often not yet interoperable, partly because the data is from many different sources and many different classifications. And bringing this information together and doing something with it which is actionable, which addresses this issue of finding the pathways towards feeding the growing global population with healthy and affordable diets. That is the key issue that we need to address. The main questions that we want to address with this challenge are: what are the global patterns of consumption, and how are these changing over time and space in relation to the major drivers of change? Drivers of change such as climate change, around the growing population growth, related to urbanization, related to issues around economic development and growing affluence and decreasing poverty, and those understanding these patterns and knowing what the triggers are that create changes in dietary patterns are really crucial for finding the kind of switches and the dials on which you can turn in order to move society into onto a more sustainable pathway while meeting the needs of people. So it's people-centric and environmentally centric approaches simultaneously. So how are these dietary transition pathways links to affordability, health, in terms of nutrition mostly, and sustainability? That is the issues that we're trying to address, and this is really complex. And this is not something that we can solve very easily, but really smart ideas on how to move this forward are very, very welcome. And that's why we entered into this context. That's what I have for my presentation. There is room for Q&A. And there is also the possibility of just reaching out to me using my email in order to get more information that you may want.
Okay, thank you very much, Guido. And this indeed is quite some minutes for questions. You can raise your hands or just switch on your microphone to ask the questions. Any questions for challenge 1? Or Gideon? Yeah, there's questions from Aaron. Please go ahead.
Hello. Thank you for your presentation. Maybe just one. You talked about different data sets which are hard to combine. Is there anything specific that it already exists in this project that should or can be worked with, or is this totally up to the participants of the project?
Okay. We will provide plenty of freedom to the team working on this challenge, but they don't have to start from scratch. Some of the other hats that I wear is I lead the community of practice on socioeconomic data within the CGIAR platform for big data and agriculture, and we are working on data interoperability. So there are tools available already and methods to do this, and you can build on what we already have there. And we have also methodologies for how to make data sets interoperable, and when you have made those data sets interoperable, how to make them reusable for others as well. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I think so. It does. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. Any other questions? Can you raise your hands? Yeah, I saw that one is Martina. Please go ahead. You can switch on your microphone. Yes.
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. So I do have a question. In this project, would it be then rather focused on the staple crops to find out how these demands developed over time, or in general how to feed the world population in the best possible way, like also nutrition wise, and also to prevent people from starving, basically? So is there a focus on staple crops or rather on quality of how to feed the world population?
It's a very good question. We're not focused specifically on staple crops. However, what is a really important issue is the combination of affordability, nutrition, and sustainability. It's therefore really important to not only look at first best options, but also at second best options. A big mistake many people make is to assume that cereals such as wheat and maize are empty calories. They're not. They provide wheat, for instance, provides 20% of protein globally. So it's not just about foods which and this is where the emotion comes in that I was talking about earlier. People talk about these things and really emotional things like, oh, okay, cereals are bad. Cereals are bad, and everybody should be eating fruit, nuts and fruits and vegetables. But when you look at it from the perspective of affordability, you look at it from the perspective of sustainability, then you run into issues that, yeah. A lot of that is not possible. It may be in a perfect world, with a much lower number of people on this planet, it would work, but it doesn't. So it really is very complex. And but definitely, it's not just about staples, but it's not about disregarding staples altogether.
Yeah, indeed, definitely not. Yes, thank you. And it's indeed a deeper discussion of how to feed the people best, and the staple crops are not totally empty. But another question I have regarding that. So the focus then should be rather, or it's not one single focus, but rather including agriculture, distribution of the food itself, and also, yeah, the whole supply chain, basically.
Okay, this is again where it's a very complex question, and there is no way that we can address everything in this short period that we have for this challenge. So it is the team will and I will discuss what the exact content will be of what they will be doing, and so there is a level of freedom there, and it's about what can be done and what can be done in a way that is really novel.
Right. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think then we'd better move to the next challenge. I saw this another hands raising, and Ling Xiao, probably you quickly ask questions.
Yeah, my question is short. Just I see there's mostly focus on the consumption. So can we also consider about the food production, because regarding to the impact areas?
Oh, absolutely. No, the production is obviously extremely important if you look at it from the perspective of sustainability. But definitely that should be part of it. But it's not where the major issues are. The International Agricultural Research has the production side really well covered. The issue is getting the consumption part right, because that is where a lot of the complexities are added on. But linking it back to all the information that is there on the production side, especially related to the sustainability issues around climate change, around water use, etc., etc.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Gideon. And for the record, that's Gideon also joined the Slack space, workspace. So if you have more questions, you're welcome to ask by the challenge one on the Slack space. And thank you very much, Gideon. And now we move to the next speaker. And that's for next two speakers. And the first is Dr. Ruben Diaz Sierra, and will be introduced by Dr. Mara Bodema. And the air is yours.
Thanks, Kinji. Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. So I'm Mara, and I'm the member of the CCSS internal member, at least for a month and something to go, because I'm actually leaving Utrecht University to go back to my home country after 10 years, and I'll be based in the National Research Council of Italy. But I'll still be following, and I will be applying as an external member. And it's my pleasure to introduce another external member, Ruben Diaz Sierra, who is from the UNED in Madrid, and Ruben and myself and Max Rittkerk, another member of the Complex Systems Center, have been working together for quite some years, and I thought the type of work that that we do surely fit also within this complexation. So back straight to it. So the idea we have, and which is mostly developed by Ruben, it's to work around species diversity and how disturbances influence species diversity in ecosystems, and especially plant ecosystems. So I'm here to tell you why, and why is this relevant? Well, you probably have heard the word biodiversity, and you probably have heard it in the news also, because it is declining. For example, for plants, the diversity is projected to decline between 7 and 24% in 2050 relative to 1995. I picked one data set, which is already a bit old, but it's local from Utrecht, but there's other predictions, and they are all of this order of magnitude. This has effects on services that biodiversity provides to humans. And I give here some example, things like yield, soil quality, disease prevalence may depend in different measures by biodiversity. It's not part of this challenge to determine what exactly the ecosystem services depend on plant biodiversity. That's more a job for real ecologists and not fake ecologists like myself and Ruben. We're both physicists, although we both work in ecology quite a bit. But this challenge is more about explaining biodiversity. So despite its importance, biodiversity is actually, or at least the fact that many species coexist in one place, it's actually not been explained in theoretical terms that well so far. And we were talking about practical application, but of course to know how to preserve biodiversity, it's extremely important to understand how it's actually functioning. And this, the basic of the theoretical explanations for species diversity so far, it's always been that that if you have species, they compete for the same resources, and the theoretical models generally predict that if you have n number of species that compete for a number X of resources, in the end you will only be left with X species. So the same number of resources is driving the number of species. But despite this theoretical long-term developments that keep getting back there, in an equilibrium view, actually this in the reality is just not seen, and this is very well known. There is a paradox called the plankton paradox. There's a lot more species of plankton than resources that are 5 or 6, and we're talking about 100 species. So the equilibrium view doesn't work. This project is about going beyond equilibrium and talking about disturbances. And I closed it here saying that we developed it together while looking at forest fires, as they are one type of disturbances. But this project is more general, talking about non-equilibrium views and disturbances in general. Please, Ruben, the floor is yours. Sorry if I was a bit long.
Thanks, Mara. So, coming from that, the paradox that Mara is talking about relies on equilibrium, on supposing that the environment is constant, so species have time enough to arrive to equilibrium, and the best competitors will be able to. But we know that in reality, systems are not at equilibrium. All the difference you can find from a constant environment will yield possibilities for coexistence. We are going to concentrate on one type of non-constant environment, which is disturbance. That is, discrete events in time that alter the system, as Mara said, like fires in forest systems. And the idea is that if the disturbance is infrequent or to a small extent, the diversity is low because best competitors offer overcompete the rest. But when disturbance comes, there is space for other species which might be faster colonizers or resist best to or better under this disturbance, so they can have another advantage different from the competition one on resources. And so when disturbance increases, diversity might increase. This is what's called the intermediate disturbance hypothesis, IDH, that we want to research on. Of course, when disturbance is too large or the fires are too frequent, then all the species will die and there's no diversity. So that's the idea behind this one maximum diversity at intermediate disturbances. This idea, the IDH, is quite old and is very prolific and well known in ecology, both in theoretical and experimental ecology. Just the recent review in this year talks about more than 900 papers about it. Some of them as highly cited as 5,000 citations. So it's a hot topic to work on. Well, how we propose to study this hypothesis? We're going to work with mathematical models because we'll try to understand the main mechanisms that work behind the coexistence and competition, and see what happens if we stick just to this mechanism, isolating them from the rest. And there's a quite old model from the 90s, this competition colonization model, which is quite simple. It's ordinary differential equations, no space. But what they model, in fact, is a space, is a competition for a space. So the whole space is divided in different patches, small cells, and each cell can host one species only. So species are going to compete for occupying the spaces, and they have two different strengths. One is being good competitor. For example, now here is species one, the top competitor, will be able to occupy every cell that is not already occupied by itself. And this is modeled by this equation. And of course, it will die eventually with a certain mortality. So it has a colonization rate and a mortality rate. A species, second species, will not be able to never to outcompete the first species, but it outcompetes the third species. So it's kind of a hierarchical system. So if we put all the equations, we can run the model and see that they arrive to an equilibrium where portions of the space are occupied by the species, and they can arrive to an equilibrium. So this competition and colonization trade-off between these characteristics can lead to equilibrium. How do people have researched here the IDH hypothesis? Well, this was a paper from 2001 that says, okay, if disturbance increases mortality, that is, it removes a species from patches and empty the patches, then we can think that the disturbance, B here in red, increases mortality. So we can do some analytic work on the model and see that more or less it provides this hump shape that the hypothesis was predicting. But there's a problem with this model, and some papers has highlighted with harshly, is that of course we are talking about pulse perturbations. That is, the perturbation arrives in a short time. So using a mortality rate that is constant is not like a very good idea, and you will never be able to differentiate between frequency and the extent of the perturbations, etc. So what can we do? We can go back to modify the model for this impulse differential model, which is more or less the same one that was in the other slide, almost all the time. But for specific points in time, there will be a perturbation that will kill some species. A portion of the species will be killed. This is given by the constant rate for each species, and they will occur at periodic times. So this is more close to the original idea of the ADH. How we can solve this? We can, of course, do a lot of simulations. I have done some preliminary simulations. So for T is the return time, the time in between perturbations. If we model how species species coexist, we'll see that for a long T, that is for very infrequent perturbations, only one species dominates, the one that is best competitor. But if you go for more frequent perturbations, then you can get more species coexistent. So it's in line with the ADH. But of course, doing simulations for 20 species, for example, will be handling 151 parameters. So it's not so easy to do. We want to simplify that. That's our proposal. We want to make some analytical research first before doing the simulations. So for one species, it will be very simple because this is a differential equation that can be solved analytically. And we have this. This is the trajectory of the system. And we can work on it and see if we start, where is the starting point that after T time, the perturbation will go back to the original point. So we find a cycle, so the species can survive to that perturbation. The condition is very simple. It's in terms of the colonization and mortality, the time between fires, and the damage that is done by the perturbation. If this is fulfilled, we'll say that we have a plus, a green plus, or if not, it's a minus, a red minus. We'll see how we arrange this information later. And even for two species, even though this equation is not analytical, for this kind of a Lotka-Volterra equation, we can work out an expression for when the species 1, the top competitor, is already in an equilibrium, in a cycle. If you put a small amount of the species 2, when it will be able to invade it, and after one perturbation, the final point will be higher than the initial point. It will lead to another expression. This is part of a paper we're working on right now. So,
Ruben, I have 2 minutes. Can you wrap up?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, thank you.
So we can organize the information and see that if all the species can invade each other, we have a diversity 2. If not, if only can survive diversity 1 or none. We can arrange all the information, analytical information in graphs. So the challenge will be for a large dimensional system, let's say 15, 20 species, how this can help us to simplify the simulations. That's the challenge. Understand the effect of frequency and extent on the diversity, how it depends on parameters, and maybe modify the model towards more complex models, like Lotka-Volterra, facilitation, etc. So thank you for your attention, and if there's any questions.
Thank you very much, Ruben, and thank you, Mara. And we have just a short questions. Any questions for a short question? You can raise up your hands. Okay. So probably because I said the short questions.
Well, I'm in Slack, so any question can be done.
Yeah, I think Ruben and Mara also joined the Slack space. So if you have any questions, you also can ask by the corresponding channels. Okay. And now we move to the challenge 3 by Dr. Bas de Dutil. And the Bas, can you share your screen, please? Yes, I saw that. Thank you. And you have to unmute yourself. Or I help you?
Yes, thank you for reminding me. Okay, thanks a lot. We are working on understanding how bacteria interact with their environment in all different kinds of environments. And we do that by using metagenomics, which is an approach to sequence the DNA of these bacteria directly from their environment. So you've heard probably about the human microbiome, which is all the microbes living in and on the human system. But these metagenomes that we use, or metagenomics that we use to identify these microbes, can actually be identified or sampled from a lot of different types of environments. And this is the data that we usually start with, and we can get quite far. So I'll explain a little bit. This is what the data looks like when we begin. It's basically a whole lot of little snippets from the genomes of these bacteria mixed together. And our challenge is to identify longer sequences from these short snippets. These short are DNA sequencing reads. They come from the machine, and we try to get towards reconstructing complete genomes from these metagenomes, and we do that by sequence assembly, and then by a process called binning that I'll explain in a second. And then once we have these genomes, what we can do if we have complete genomes is we can construct reasonably detailed metabolic models of what these bacteria can do. And we can use these metabolic models to predict or model their interaction with the metabolic environment. So we can predict which metabolites the bacteria need to grow on, which metabolites they might secrete and transfer to other bacteria, which can then grow in turn. And this whole complex process is what we're interested in studying. Okay, so binning is a process where we try to identify which of the longer sequences that we have reconstructed from a metagenome belong together in a so-called bin. So here's 3 bins that are drawn, and we can sort the contents into the right bin. So this means we can put the sequences, the partial genome sequences of bacteria together in the same cluster or group, which represents a single bacterial genome. And then we can look at the sequences in each of these genomes and look at the metabolic functions that are encoded on these sequences so that we can try and understand the metabolic network. This is what I showed on the previous slide. I'm not sure about the order of all of my slides because but some of the information that we can get from these metagenome assembled genomes, so MAGs as the abbreviation that people usually use for that, is, for example, the evolutionary relationships between the bacteria that we find, and also the evolutionary relationships between the new bacteria that we find and the bacteria that are already known, so the ones that are in the database, for example. And here's an example from a tree where we have a lot of new ones, the ones with the red dots, in the context of genomes that we already know. We can also estimate the completeness of these MAGs by looking at marker genes. So this is a sort of a crude estimate of genomic completeness. And what you often find is that these genomes are not really complete. So this is because, of course, the process of binning that I showed on the previous slide doesn't always group together all the contigs correctly. Some contigs might be left out. Some contigs might also actually be binned in the wrong cluster. So then we have sometimes incomplete genomes, and sometimes we even have overcomplete genomes. And based on that information, we still want to make an accurate estimate of what the metabolic network of these bacteria looks like. So we've been trying to use machine learning for this. Luckily, we have a lot of training data available. There's a big database of 400,000 bacteria, from which we selected just over 2,000 that are not closely related to each other. Relatively not closely related because we selected one different genome from each genus of bacteria that is present in this database. And of course, there's still genera that are more closely related than other genera. We'll see that on the next slide. Anyway, we have these 2,000 bacteria, and from each of these bacteria, we identify all of the genes, and then here in columns, we have listed the genes or the reactions that are present in these genomes. And what we can then easily do is we can split out this data set into training, testing, and validation. We can, for the training set, we can make these bacterial genomes incomplete by turning some of the ones into zeros, as you can see here. And then we can use that training data to train a neural network where we, of course, know which sequences have to be in the genome because we have the complete genome sequences from the database, and we can train this neural network to identify which reactions should be added to this to these genomes. And like that, we can try to predict complete metabolic networks, for incomplete bacterial genomes. And we've done that for these 2000 bacteria. And yeah, this is the performance. So you see here in the corner a plot that has the F1 score on the x-axis, and it's a histogram. So we see that actually for no single bacteria can we do it perfectly. That's a little bit disappointing already. We do see that for a lot of bacteria we get reasonably high F1 scores, but there's also a bunch that are really, really low. And then if you look at the phylogenetic or evolutionary tree of all the bacteria on the left, this big circle. So this is a sort of an evolutionary tree. I'm not sure you're familiar with this kind of plots, but there's little branches here that indicate how closely related these bacteria are. Then you can quite clearly see that the high scoring bacteria are actually the ones like here, for example, on the 9 o'clock range, where the bacterial genera are really, really closely related to each other. So these are different genera of bacteria that are actually not so different after all, as we can see in the tree. And we can see that for those ones, we can predict the metabolic functions pretty accurately. But if we have bacteria that are really different than all of the other ones, and we can see that here by the long branches in this tree, then you see that they're actually really badly predicted. The F1 scores get really, really low. So yeah, this is basically a result that might be expected, because of course, if something looks like something that you already know or that you have in your training data in some way, even though they're different genera, then of course it will be easier to predict what they can do. So I want to try and, one of the challenges will be to try and mitigate this problem a little bit, or as much as possible, or whatever. Okay. Yeah, I have here a little bit more detail about these predictions that we did. We can bias the results towards the negative class. So if we have a bias towards the negative class, then negatives are really important to predict. If there's no bias towards the negative class, then positives are really important to predict. So here you predict mostly positives. Here you predict mostly negatives. So there's no false positives over here. Here there is no positives at all. And you can see that depending on how many reactions we artificially delete in the training set, you get different performance of the precision. So you get a higher precision when more reactions are deleted. And this sounds a bit weird, because if you delete more reactions, you should know you have less information. So how can you do a better prediction? But actually the recall is exactly the same for all of these three types of sets. And what this means to me, and we haven't actually looked at this in detail, but what this means to me is that actually, regardless of how many reactions you actually delete, the exact same set of reactions gets predicted for every genome. So you can delete really a lot of data, but the same reactions will be predicted all the time. And this is probably the reactions that are really easy to predict for the neural network. And so bacteria at all levels of evolutionary relationship have a so-called core. Core are the genes that are shared with other bacteria. And so those, of course, depending on how closely related the most closely related other bacterium is, will be easy to predict. And so I think that this is actually what's happening, is that it can really easily predict the core of functions for these bacteria, but it cannot predict these less core. There's a word that I forgot. Anyway, the reactions that are present in genomes, but that are only present in specific genomes, and those might depend, of course, on other reactions in the network. So if the bacteria will use it, it's difficult to predict them based on these evolutionary relationships. So I think by looking at how much a certain gene is a core gene across bacteria, maybe that kind of information might also help to predict better the less core genes. Okay, and this is a little bit more biology. So the evolutionary conservation of functions. If you look at different bacteria that are more or less related on this axis, you see very closely related bacteria that are 100% identical on this one marker gene that we have here, might have a very different functional composition. And this is basically a different way of showing what I showed here with this core gene flower. You see that actually, there's certain genes that are always shared, but there's also a lot of genes that might be quite variable. And I think those are going to be the ones that are difficult to predict. So that will be the challenge. I'm going to skip this slide because it's actually too much for the couple minutes that I have left. I do want to highlight still this picture of how metabolic pathways might be organized on the genome sequence. So the genome sequence is what we see over here. And you know, in many cases that genes that have a functional relationship, for example, that are close together in the metabolic network, which we wish to predict, are closely encoded closely together on the genome sequence. So this is also information that we could use. We haven't yet used in our predictor before, but the location along the genome length is information that might be encoded in some way to improve these predictions. This is also important background biology, how these genes are actually encoded on the genome. Of course, the genome is in bacteria generally a single circle where all the genes lie side by side, and sometimes organized into metabolic pathways like this, sometimes not. Sometimes they're also at different places. They evolve vertically by splitting, and then certain mutations can take place. For example, genes can be rearranged along the genome length, but there might also be horizontal gene transfer where part of another bacterium gets inserted into the genome of this bacteria. And so this whole way that functions are. I'm trying to rush for my time. I'm sorry for. The way that these genes are encoded on the genome and the way that these genomes evolve, I think might contain extra information that we can also use. So how these genes are encoded together on the genome, which genes are more closely related than others on a genome. For example, these genes here in blue are together derived from another bacterium, which I indicated here in blue, and so they might be more closely related than other genes on the genome, or have a similar evolutionary history is actually what I wanted to say, not necessarily closely related, but that can also be measured. There's a lot of information that could be measured, yes, that we want to put into this network, into this predictor, and we want to get rid of this bag of genes model. This summarizes my challenge, and I'm sorry for getting mixed up at the end, but I would like to develop better machine learning models to predict a full metabolic network from partial genome data, and we could consider taking into account information, for example, information about how incomplete the genome is, the evolutionary relationships between bacteria or genes, how core a specific gene is, where on the genome things are encoded, and we can discuss other possible signals as well. Okay, thank you very much, and sorry for.
Thank you very much, Bas, and sorry to make you feel such in a hurry. So we have time for a short question. Is anyone want to raise a hand for a short question? I see if in a rush and no one want to raise a hand. So I think that the Bas also will stand by for questions. So we first move to the challenge 4 by Dr. Carla Costa. Yeah, Carla, I think you're still muted. Yes.
Hello, yes. Let me just share my slides. And I will start by thanking Quincy so much for organizing all this. It's really great. And thanks for all the work. So I hope you can see my slides already.
Yeah,
yes. Okay.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
So I'm going to present a challenge that is more in the economics area. But I think it could be interesting for people even from other areas, so we can really understand this topic well. And it's really about the regional and embodied knowledge flow. So I think this sounds a bit more complex, but I'll try to explain it. I'll start by trying to motivate what is the problem. and what is the motivation for this work. And what I'm really trying to do in this project or with this challenge is try to understand better what makes for valuable knowledge flows. And I'm talking about knowledge flows which come from the movement of people inside industry. So people who move, change jobs, go to a different company, or even create their own company inside an industry and inside a region. This is something we called embodied knowledge flow. So knowledge that is embodied in people who really actually go across companies and take their knowledge with them. And so this, in some regions, I think you all are familiar with the case of Silicon Valley, where we know that there's a lot of, a huge concentration of firms who are very successful, and they are really located very close together. And part of the explanation for this success of these firms is, or could be, or has been attributed to this possibility of having this labor flow there. So this having all these people who have very specific, very intense knowledge, and when they move around from company to company, or when they create their own startups, then you see that this knowledge goes around and really makes for all the success. So there's been a lot of work done before on this, what we call industry clusters, but this is still not fully understood, this part of what we call human capital. So what does really make for the value that people take across different companies, and what is really driving this? Is it this experience of these people? Is it that their education level? Is it that they have been staying in this region and they know a lot of people inside the region? So we don't really understand this human capital quite well, and this is why I think this challenge can really help us go a bit deeper here. And the challenge here is that we have a lot of information. So we know, and in this case, I have data about a lot of these employees. I have data about how they move between firms. And they also know that they have this kind of like skill profiles. They have their own characteristics. They also have their characteristics of the jobs they had before, their experience, their profession or their professional classification, the kind of tasks they've been involved. And what I wanted to propose here is that we use machine learning, mostly classification techniques, to first kind of try to cluster this kind of profiles together so that we understand what makes for these profiles. But then I think, and for this, I would suggest using unsupervised learning, machine learning algorithms to try to understand, kind of get a hold of these clusters. But then I think if you're ambitious, and I think there's space for this as well in this challenge, it would be that you would also move to more supervised machine learning algorithms, where you could do a little bit more about predictions on the performance of the firms, how these profiles really impact the performance of these firms, and how does this really play a role in this clusters. Yeah, so the main question here would be to try to disentangle what is inside these embodied knowledge flows. What kind of skill patterns do the workers have when they move around? And maybe perhaps they have different skill patterns when they move only between firms, and they possibly have different kinds of skill patterns when they go and create a startup in their industry in the same region. Or, if there is what kind of profiles really are moving among different types of firms, and what are the profiles that actually are driving performance of firms. So there's a lot of questions and a lot of things that we could really uncover here. And I think there's room to play a lot with this data and try to find out, interesting and relevant patterns that could be hidden in there that we haven't really been able to identify so far. And I wanted to show you a little bit about this data and this case that I'm working on. And this is the case of a region in Portugal, where we see here these are network analysis from these industries. And what I look here is at how employees move from firms within one industry to another. And we see here the colors of the industry. So there's molds companies and plastics and glass companies in this industry. That's really the most prevalent industries in this region. And then in this other graph here, we can see that most of the mobility of workers goes into the yellow kind of dots, which are representing companies in the molds industry. So you see that there's a lot of mobility of workers from also the plastics and a little bit from the glass industry into this molds industry. So there's this also possibility to look at what are these flows from the other industries bringing in, and also inside the molds industry, which is the molds industry is a case of very successful industry in Portugal, and specifically inside this cluster. So this is where we're going to be focusing most of the attention. So this is just to give you an idea of what kind of things I can already see in this data, but I wanted to go a lot deeper and try to understand better what's going on. And this is indeed a bit of a complex data, and there's a lot of things going on in this embodied knowledge flows. Of course, some things we cannot really identify in the data, but a lot of things I think we can really see better if we'll try to look at this data. And we can see that, for example, all these employees have different ages, they have different genders, they have different levels of education and also areas of education. They have different years of experience, they have different areas of experience, and by this I mean previous jobs. They also have different levels of tenure, so how long they've been staying in this industry, and they have this profession or job function as well. So there's a lot of richness here that we can really explore. And the first step will be to identify these patterns within these skills of their workers, and then try to understand how they affect these knowledge flows and how they affect the performance of the companies in this industry. And this is all in the data that I will be providing for this challenge. And then it's really a matter of kind of working with it and trying to identify all these interesting things. And to try to understand or try to help you understand a bit more about what is the societal importance of this. This is really an important step to try to understand firm performance and especially industrial cluster performance. How do these clusters, how can we explain their performance? What is really within this movements of people that can really make these firms perform better? And this is important not only to just help the firms or to understand what is driving their performance, but it's also important for policy, because we know that there's been a lot of different policies trying to promote clusters and trying to get regions to develop faster and really get this advantages of clustering. And a lot of these policies are misguided and are wasting a lot of funding or public money into things that actually have not been proven to work and have been really a big waste of funding. So the idea would be that if we have this better understanding of this embodied knowledge flows, then we can really try to help develop better policy for this kind of regions. Especially, you can also think that this will help deprived regions that are trying to be more developed and try to build their industry. Yeah, so I just wanted to, I think I'm going to leave a bit of time for questions. I just wanted to show you some examples of the literature, but this is not important right now, but just for later, if you want to get more acquainted with the topic. And there's a lot of literature on this as well. But yeah, I'm just really looking forward for questions. And in particular, I'm really looking forward for your insights in the project and what we can find together on this topic. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say. I hope there are some questions as well.
Thank you very much, Carla. So any questions? And you can just raise your hands or unmute yourself. Yeah, Aaron, please go ahead.
Hey, it's me again. Thank you once again for your presentation. Really interesting stuff. So once again, I want to know a little bit more concretely what data you have. So as far as I understood it, you have data on streams of people moving between different locations, and you have information on all these individuals.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And now we're trying to find out, well, we're trying to find pattern generally, but then more specifically, what makes these clusters of, well, industries as well as humans productive, or what makes them, well, successful, right? Is that about? Okay.
Yeah, you've got it right. Yes. So what we have, well, this is based on data that is that really has three kind of sets of information. So one is on companies, and the other one is on employees, and the other one is on establishments. That's not important, but mostly on the companies and on their employees. So based on this, I've already compiled a more worked out data set where you can see the flows of people between these companies inside this cluster. So you can already see, so if you have the history of all these employees and all their jobs from before, you can see where they've moved, what kind of years of experience they had, where have they worked before. So you can really compile a lot of information on about the company and also about the employee himself. So what I have already prepared is data that gives you information on this, you know, about each person, where have they moved within the cluster, and what is their past, and also what is their age, their, you know, the profession that they have declared. All this data is really already there. So, but it's really very rich. So I have this all on my hands and I can provide it. But then there's a lot to find out about these patterns and to really get a better understanding of what's going on here. But the data is pretty complete on this kind of information. Of course, it's limited. It will not tell you who do these people know. You know, for example, that's also kind of something that we'd like to know. But there's a lot of information there already.
And it's also correct that it's therefore still quite exploratory. So there's not that you've got very clearly defined directions yet, but you still are just kind of seeing what's there. Mm-hmm. Is that?
Yes. Yeah. I think at this stage, I mean, of course, I have ideas that I think perhaps we will see those patterns, but I think it would be really open to just really explore what is out there and try to understand what can we see there, what does the data tell us really, and what can we learn from that also in terms of performance of the firms and of the actual the whole region. Yeah.
Okay, that's really cool. That's really cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Actually, it took me a while to see that there's questions for our speakers. And Bas, please.
Yeah, thanks. So this sounds indeed really like a complex process that you're looking at. So can you explain why you're looking at this?
Why?
Are you looking for mechanisms? Are you looking to increase, I don't know, people's contributions, or find the right person for the right job? What's the goal?
No, it's really more about mechanisms, as you said. It's really about trying to understand what's in this human capital. Because we understand human capital is important in these industries, especially in clusters, and there's a lot of papers and a lot of research on this topic, but we don't really understand exactly what's inside this human capital. And I wanted to try to dig a bit more to try to get a more of a clear view on what is it that these people are valuable for as employees, and what kind of knowledge are they carrying around. What is it that really matters?
Don't you think that asking supervisors would be a good approach for this too, or?
Supervisors? What do you mean?
Yeah, like people who hire. Why does somebody hire someone? Don't you think that they will have a lot of knowledge about this?
Yes, but I mean, then you would have a qualitative kind of research, which is not something I can do at this moment. What I can do is use the data, and I think there's a lot we can learn here as well. Because, if you ask the supervisors, you can also get biased answers, and I'm not sure sometimes they know exactly what is it that is so valuable about this person. So I think we can find, it might be that the fact that this person works for a number of years in this location is important. It might be that it works in this industry is important, or if it works in a related industry, that's important. I don't know, and this is what I want to know. So
Okay,
this is why. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Bas. That's nice to see the bridge in between, even with between speakers. But now we have to move to Eric. But I think Carla would like to join the Slack, and so she will stand by for questions as well. Thank you very much. And now we move to challenge 5. So it's by Dr. Eric Van Sabie. So now it's yours, Eric.
Yeah, thank you. So we'll continue on the topic of plastic, but of course a completely different side of plastic, and that is the plastic that is now littering our ocean. So I am a physicist at the Department of Physics at the Institute for Marine and Atmospheric Research in Utrecht. And what we do in my team is we create numerical simulations of how plastic moves through the ocean. And essentially the goal is to play the blame game. So who is to blame for the plastic that we find in the ocean? And then ultimately, what can we do about that? But we have a problem because we can create these models and we can do the simulations, but it is really, really hard to then combine the models with the observations. In the end, what we want to do is a machine learning approach where we essentially create parameterizations of how plastic moves through the ocean. But for that, we need data. And the data is very difficult to come by, and that's exactly what this Complexaton Challenge 5 is. Essentially, trawling through the rubbish that we call the scientific literature. Or, well, a lot of course is not rubbish, but you get the pun, I guess. So we've done this a little bit already. And thanks to the very hard work of my colleague Cara Lavender-Law in 2015, we were able to publish a paper where we used in total 11,000 data points collected from all over the ocean, as you see over here. So data points in the Pacific Ocean, data points in the Atlantic Ocean, and some in some of the other oceans. And these are typically nets that are trawled by a ship through the ocean. So you take a net through the ocean, and then after a kilometer or so, you just count how many pieces of plastic are in a net. And if you do that on a log scale, you see that some areas it's still blue, so fairly low amounts of plastic, up to very, very high amounts of plastic here between Hawaii and California. And this, of course, is now the well-known garbage patch that, say, Boyan Slat wants to clean up also. Now, a few months ago, actually, a PhD researcher in my group, Michael Kaandorp, he further extended this, and he looked specifically at the Mediterranean. And what he did was, literally by just going through all the literature and reading all of the papers, he came up with a data set where at each of these locations he found, so there was a documented measurement of a group that had trawled plastic through the ocean and found how much plastic there was in that position. And then by combining that with our simulations, our numerical models, he was able to do a Bayesian data simulation where you could actually, so in red are the priors, and in black are the posteriors. So he was really able to narrow down some of the parameters. So the beaching timescale, the sinking timescale, and some other parameters to really try and understand, well, what do these observations then mean to the total amount of plastic in the Mediterranean? And in the end, he came up with this map that shows in the yellow to blues, it shows the amount of plastic on the coastlines all around the Mediterranean, and in the browns, the amount of plastic that has sunk to the ocean floor in the Mediterranean. Now, and if you then combine all of that, then he ended up with the estimate that roughly 50% or so of all the plastic in the Mediterranean has beached, roughly 40% or so have sunk, and the last 10% is still afloat. So this is really nice that we can do this now, that we have this machinery, and that Mikael created of this. But the problem is that the first step, going through all the literature, was enormously complicated. It was a lot of handwork, and this is only for a small part of the ocean. Moreover, it was only for the measurements that were actually taken with ships on the type that we know about. And ideally, of course, we now want to also include data about the amount of plastic, say, on beaches, or data about the amount of plastic on the seafloor, so that we can actually validate our model with those data too. But we don't have those data. And that's what this challenge is about, is to try and figure out, well, where is all the data and how much data is there? There is a starting point, fortunately. So in Germany, in Bremerhaven, a group has set up an online litter base, which is a database where they collect literature for how much plastic has been found in the ocean. But this is literally hand curated. So these are undergraduate students who just type in and type over whatever comes out in the literature about the amount of plastic. And that is hundreds of papers a month nowadays. So that's a lot of work. Plus they might very easily miss something. So of course, that's not sustainable. We want something that's automated. We want something that's much smarter than that. And that is what this project is about. Can we automatically search the literature for these type of observations of plastic? We've done a little bit of exploratory already, and if you just go into the Web of Knowledge or so, and you type in this query, then it actually is 87,000 articles that are returned, and that's of course a lot. But many of them are not actually about plastic pollution. They're about shipping containers, about ocean liners, about all kind of other things. So another way to go about is to go back to kind of like what was the seminal first paper about plastic in the ocean. And that turns, I think, is a paper from 2004 by Richard Thompson in Science. And if you just look at all the citations to this paper, that's, well, the paper itself is almost 800 times cited, but if you go in a network that is 4, that's almost 100,000 articles that have been cited, the citations of this article, right? So in 16 years, at the depth at 4, you get to 100,000 articles. But a lot of those, well, yeah, and then you can narrow it to only those in environmental studies or in oceanography, and only those that have a table where the caption actually contains plastic. And then you get to something like 800 tables from 400 articles or so. So then it becomes quite interesting and something that we can actually work with and that we can start playing around with. Now, the challenge is actually to parse the tables, because, for example, the units are not always the same. The measured quantities can be in number per square kilometer, in gram per square meter, in number per liter, in number per cubic meter, all kinds of different units there. And also the georeferencing system, because of course we want to know where are these observations taken. They can be different. So they can either be in decimal degrees like here, or they can be in degrees and minutes and seconds. So there's a lot of possibilities there. So just 2 random tables here that I took. And we really need to some smart code and some smart natural language processing to be able to parse these data and get them into a database so that we can actually directly use them in our work and in our bigger projects. So that, I guess, is the challenge of the project, is to how to automatically identify peer review papers that contain data and observations of plastic in the ocean and on beaches. Some of that we've done already, but it could be much improved. And then especially the second and the third one are the challenge, how to automatically parse that data and actually put it into a database, and how to geotag the plastic observations to both the location and also ideally the time of sampling. We also want to know when the sampling was done, and that is very often just in a caption or so, or somewhere in the paper. So with that, I think I'll leave it. I hope you can see the challenge, and I hope you can see the exciting opportunities that this gives. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Eric. Any questions? And you can raise up your hand or just unmute yourself. Questions for Eric?
Hi, Kingi. This is Gideon.
Oh, hey.
Hi.
Sorry, another speaker. Yeah,
Yeah,
please go ahead.
No, very interesting challenge, and I'd really like to see where this goes, because this is an issue which goes way beyond just plastics in the ocean. There is a lot of areas where there is a lot of information that is hidden in scientific papers, but not in big databases, which could be really useful. No, just a comment, small comment.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Yeah, it's nice to see that all the Complexaton challenges actually is related. So it's very exciting to see that. And any questions from attendees? Because I only scroll down to see this. But I think that's Mikael, that's the co-supervisor, also could join the Slack. And if there's any other questions, then he could answer from there, from Slack.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much, Eric. So we then move to the challenge 6, and that's will be Dr. Julia Orlova. And Julia, can you share your screen, please?
Sure, just a moment. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, that's the middle of the. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Here. All right.
Right. Thanks.
So good almost evening, everyone. And yeah, so my name is Julia Orlova, and today I'm presenting challenge number 6, which is called Networks and Chemical Evolution of Oil Paintings. So I would first like to introduce myself, because probably no one knows me here. And I was encouraged to submit my problem by Dr. Ivan Krivin, whom some of you might know. He is an assistant professor at Utrecht University, and he was my supervisor at the University of Amsterdam. So I'm also probably the youngest one out of all the people who present the problems, because I finished my PhD 1.5 months ago. And yeah, basically this problem is based on the results that we've got from my PhD problem, and how can it be extended. So I will start from introducing you to our problem and showing you what we have done, and then I will also introduce you to the challenges that that we would like to address. So my project was in the intersection of these 3 fields, which is cultural heritage, complex systems, and chemistry. And I would like to focus this presentation, of course, on the complex systems, and I will try to keep you away from other 2. Yeah, in case I use some jargon or you don't understand some parts, you can always clarify. So. Yeah, so the aim of my project was to model a drying process of oil paint, and as we know, so it's quite complex process, because molecules of so oil paint mainly consists of pigment and binding medium, and binding medium is usually some kind of oil that is highly reactive. And the problem with this molecule is that it has many reaction sites that can undergo reactions or either simultaneously or in some sequential ways. So in the end, when we have, like here, I show this complex reaction, this kind of reaction steps. So they are just these small reaction steps that happen to one particular reaction site of the molecules. But then, for example, if a molecule has 3 reactive sites, and each of these reactive sites can follow its own reaction pathways, we run into a combinatorial problem when we just want to uncover all elementary reaction steps that happen to this molecule. So in that sense, that was one of the challenges, and in order to model these processes, we really needed to go into all these details. So here is just like a small slide just showing you what is the motivation of doing this kind of research. So how would modeling help? And mathematical modeling of this kind of chemical processes would assist answering such questions as, for example, what is the age of the painting? So just by looking at the chemical composition of the painting, we could maybe try to judge whether like it was painted 10 years ago or it's like 1 century ago. Also, what is the composition of the mixture of oils used by artists? So sometimes some artists use more than one oil and then they mix them. And then also this you could observe if, for example, a restorer or conservator analyzes the sample. And also how do various pigments influence the degradation of oil networks? So these all questions are like the 3 maybe like big challenges in our research, and well, we were trying to approach to some of them. So here I would like to show you how we did it, and basically what we did, we developed a methodology that is called automated reaction network generation, and this is the way to program chemistry. So in that sense, we kind of like we define our reactions on the substructures of the molecules, and we also represent molecules as molecular graphs. And then by algorithmically applying reactions to the reactive sites of the molecules, we are able to reconstruct a full network of reactions that happen in our system. So here is just a very small fragment of reaction network, so I will talk about it a bit later. And then when we have a network of reaction, we can reconstruct a mathematical model that describes basically the chemical composition of the paint over time, so how this chemical composition changes. So in this Complexaton, I would like to focus more on these last 2 parts where we have a reaction network. And from this reaction network, we construct a mathematical model or like a dynamical system that describes the concentrations. And here is just like a zoom into what's actually happening in the reaction network. So on the left, you can see just 3 simple reaction steps, and we have kind of hypothetical molecules, A, B, C, D, and so on. And next to it, I show how the reaction network of this small reaction mechanism would look like. So basically, it's a bipartite graph where we have 2 types of nodes, and one type corresponds to molecules, and another type corresponds to reactions. And so basically, when we have a reaction, like for example, A plus B goes to C and D, this reaction is usually characterized by something called rate parameter, which tells you how fast and probable the reaction happens in given conditions. And in this sense, we can basically, like A and B, they are together pointing to the node K1. And then from K1, we have products D and C. So that's just the way to capture all our reactions. And you can also see that these processes are not non-linear. So by using this reaction network representation is basically a systematic way to represent all the reaction mechanism that we have. It's could be maybe similar to metabolic networks, as there was another speaker today. So in our case, we also give weights to these nodes, and molecules have weights of the concentrations of the species so molecule nodes have the value of the concentrations of these molecules in the system. And the reactions, they contain this rate parameter, which kind of defines how fast the reaction happens. And also, please note that this rate parameter comes with some kind of uncertainty, which I will be talking about a bit later. So the problem comes that so when we talk about some particular chemical system, the number of distinct molecules corresponds to the number of equations in the resulting dynamical system. So when we actually when we applied our automated reaction network mechanism and tried to uncover the reaction network of oil paint, well, we ended up with something really big. And here is an example of a bipartite reaction network of a very limited set of reactions. And it's not the full reaction mechanism, it's just like really fragment of it. So, and this reaction network I could still visualize on the screen. But then when we were expanding our methodology, we ran even into bigger systems. So for example, this is a reaction network which consists of 3,887 molecules, which take part in almost 3.5 million of reactions. So to represent this reaction network, I projected it on a monopartite graph. So I avoided the reaction nodes and just captured the direct transformations between the molecules. And of course, you can imagine, and yeah, I should also mention that this is not the full molecule of linseed oil, of the binding medium of paint. It's only 1/3 of it. So it's only like one part of this whole molecule. So you can imagine that we run into a problem that we end up with a dynamical system which has almost 4,000 equations. And when we want to do some kind of, so basically when we want to study some, look at the different influence of various parameters, or we would like to optimize our rate parameters against some experimental data. So when we just want to solve this system like more than once, we might run into a problem because it takes a lot of time to solve it numerically. And we are not so flexible with, for example, analyzing the system. So the main challenge for now, I would say, if we want to model the whole molecule of oil paint, and we also want to kind of manipulate this dynamical system and maybe study it a bit better, we would like to reduce the model. And yeah, so basically the idea is that we are looking for model reduction method. What I tried to do, I tried to look at the chemistry, and I tried to find some kind of ways of whether we could use some chemical reasoning to reduce the system, but unfortunately I couldn't find any. And what I thought would be nice is that maybe the teams that participate in this Complexaton, the team could try to take the complex systems approach and maybe try to analyze a network and figure out whether we could reuse this model based on the reaction network that we have. So what we are looking for is that here on the left, you can see the concentration profiles of all these molecules. I took it from this very big reaction network. So here we have almost 4,000 concentration profiles. And of course, when we want to analyze our results, we don't look at one individual molecule. We look at some kind of common features, some kind of ensembles of these concentrations. And here on the right, you can see basically this concentrations grouped together according to some particular features that we can observe on the molecule. So the objective is to reduce the model using the reaction network, and in such a way that this kind of final grouped features will not change. So yeah, so that brings me to my slide with challenges. And yeah, the first challenge is can the model be reduced based on the underlying structure of reaction network? And second challenge is also, so if you remember, I mentioned that there is some kind of uncertainty in the rate parameters, so the parameters that define how fast a reaction goes. And it would maybe also be interesting to look at how this uncertainty of rate parameters propagates through the solution of the model and influences the final result. Also, I wanted to mention what I can provide to the teams. I thought it would be nice to provide bipartite and monopartite reaction networks, and I would also I would make a toy model which is not so crazy as I showed you, the one with 3,800 something molecules, but maybe a smaller one, a reduced one. So then it's not so, it doesn't take so much time to work with this kind of networks, and also the full models. So for example, if there is some kind of methodology of a model reduction developed on a toy system, it can also be tested on the full model. And I would also provide these dynamical systems for both models and their solutions. And then the solution will basically describe how the concentrations of each molecule change at each point of time. So basically, if you think about the network, you can you know how the weight of each node that corresponds to a molecule changes with time. So because weight corresponds to the concentration. And yeah, maybe like the objective would be how you could use this kind of data to reduce the model, and also maybe to study how the uncertainty propagates with time. So with this, I would like to thank my supervisors who helped me with this project, Piet Idema and Ivan Krupin. I would like to thank you for your attention, and you can also contact me on my email, or you can contact me on Slack. I'm already there, and yeah, I'm open for questions.
Thank you very much, Julia. That's very interesting. And any questions for now and to Julia over this project or presentations? Question. Okay, now it's approaching end of the day, so yeah. But it's good that Julia now I saw you also joined the Slack, so that's good. And then you can also answer questions there. So thank you very much for your time. So I see that it's better we proceed to the last challenge, and but thank you very much. And now the last challenge will be presented by Dr. Claudia Venus. Claudia?
I'm coming.
Yeah, great. Can you share your screen, please?
Yes, I hope.
At least now you know there's 7 people interested in your project. Great, thanks.
All right. I'm working at the Institute for Marine and Atmospheric Research, Utrecht, and I'm interested in geoengineering and how this may affect international climate negotiation. So let's first talk a little bit about free riding and emission reduction, so not yet about geoengineering. When countries are negotiating about what to do regarding climate change, they have to balance the global interests of the whole Earth against their own national interests. Because, well, climate change is damaging, as we all know, but avoiding climate change by reducing greenhouse gas emission is costly, at least initially. And so countries balance the global good against their own advantages. Typically in integrated assessment models, so models who try to find optimal climate policy, it is assumed that there is one single decision maker who tries to optimize for the global good. But in real life, there are different countries or groups of countries like the EU who also have their own interests. So emission reduction, as I said, is costly for the country who is doing it. On the other hand, if I emit something, then you are all going to feel the damage. So I can, if I want to reduce my emissions, I pay a lot of money, but the damage which I suffer from my own emissions is relatively small, but you guys are going to suffer from it. So why should I bother to reduce your damage, right? So if I'm an egoistic and rational person, I try to free ride, so I do nothing about emissions, but I hope that you all are going to do something to my benefit without bearing the costs myself. But if everyone does this, then we have a suboptimal outcome where everybody does nothing because doing something costs you money, whereas globally it would be better for everybody if everybody had done something and the others also. So that's like the prisoner's dilemma for climate mitigation. So there was a nice paper by Brede and de Vries in 2013, who made a model which tries to capture the essence of this free riding problem and show that a globally optimal outcome requires collaboration or altruism among countries. This is just one plot from this model. On the x-axis, you see the number of countries. On the y-axis, you see the relative utility. So basically, the more utility, the better is the outcome for everyone, and for different range of climate damage severities. And basically, the thing is, the more countries you have, who each have to do their own bit to reduce the emissions, the less good is the global outcome, because the more countries you have, the more you have to hope that nobody defects and everybody does their bit. Okay, so that was about climate change reduction, but now enter the new technology of geoengineering. the basic idea of geoengineering is to imitate explosive volcanic eruptions, such as the Pinatubo eruption of 1991, which emitted 20 megatons of SO2, sulfur dioxide, into the stratosphere, where it reacted to form sulfate aerosol that forms a thin cloud layer. You can see it here in this picture, a thin cloud layer above the usual range of weather activity, and this cloud layer reflects some sunlight and leads to cooling. And the idea is that if Pinatubo can do this, maybe we can do that as well. That's called stratospheric aerosol injection. It's probably not very expensive to implement. We just have to improve existing airplanes or build new airplanes that can fly sufficiently high. So probably even a single country can do that. And it can probably reduce some effects of climate change, but it's an imperfect solution. It does not tackle all the problems, and also it may be an environmental risk itself. So now there was a nice thought experiment by Fabre and Wagner in 2020, who suggested that the possible option of geoengineering may break this free-riding problem in climate negotiations. So in their very simple thought experiment, they said, let's suppose there are two countries or two groups of countries. The group one wants to really fight climate change by reducing emission, even though it's expensive. Maybe this is the group who suffer most from the climate change. And group two wants to do nothing at all. And for now, we assume that there's no geoengineering, so it's either fight climate change or do not fight climate change. So then group two says, well, I do nothing. And then group one probably says, well, I would prefer that everyone does something. But if group two doesn't do anything, we also don't do anything. So as soon as there's one group who doesn't want to do anything, then probably nobody is going to do something. Now, let's suppose that we add this risky and imperfect option of geoengineering, and that group one, who actually prefers most to reduce climate change through emission reduction, says, well, if you don't get emission reduction, which would be the preferred option, then at least we prefer geoengineering against doing nothing. Now, group two still thinks that climate change is not such a problem, so they prefer doing nothing, but they are so afraid of geoengineering that they rank it behind reducing emissions. So now, if group two says we do nothing, then group one can say, well, if you do nothing, well, then emission reduction is not going to work, but then we will implement the geoengineering because one country on its own can do that. And if group two is sufficiently afraid of geoengineering, it may be forced into doing the emission reduction. So we break this free riding dynamics. So your task is to investigate in a more complex model by Broaden and de Vries the potential role of geoengineering in multi-country negotiations. To give you a bit more of a taste how to do this, I will briefly describe very qualitatively the model by Broaden and de Vries. So let's first focus on the processes within one country. In each country, GDP is produced, so economic production takes place, and this requires energy, capital, so let's say machines, and a laboring population, and the population grows, but the more wealthy a country is, the less strong the population will grow. This GDP can then either be consumed, and the more you consume, the happier you are, so you try to optimize always having something to consume. But also you can invest it to generate new machines or to generate energy. But this energy production is a bit more complex than I just said, because it can either come from fossil fuel energy plants or it can come from renewable energy plants. Fossil fuel plants are initially cheaper, but in the course of time, fuel gets depleted and then it becomes more expensive to have fuel plants. So the idea is if I have to dig the fuel in a very costly fashion, then the fuel price is going to rise. Green plants, on the other hand, are initially quite expensive, but the more green plants are built, the cheaper they become because, well, we learn more efficiently how to do it. It's learning by doing. So eventually green plants become cheaper. If, however, we use fuel plants, then we also emit CO2. The CO2 can damage the climate, and the climate change then in turn causes economic damage, which is going to reduce your GDP. So this is the dynamics in one country. But now we can have several countries. So here I'm plotting two. In each country, you have in a very simplified manner the diagram I just showed before. But now these different countries are coupled in three different ways. First of all, if they use energy from fuel, well, they both need fuel, so they both deplete a global fuel resource. And they may affect each other. If this country uses a lot of fuel, then this country is not going to have enough fuel in the future. On the other hand, if both deploy green plants, then they both can add to the global stock of knowledge, so they make it easier also for the other country to adopt green plants. And finally, they both use the same atmosphere to dump their CO2, so if one country fosters climate damage, the other country is going to suffer as well. So to summarize, if you have non-cooperating countries, they each want to use up the fossil fuel to grow their economy before the other country has depleted the resource already. They both are tempted to delay doing the green transition because they hope that the other country is going to do all these difficult innovations, and then you can just use the already cheaper technology. And of course, nobody is suffering so much from only their own share of emissions. So we have this free riding problem that I don't want to reduce my emissions unless anyone else does. So to solve this model, there's an optimization procedure, and it's assumed that countries plan their future action once and for all. So let's say we have a climate negotiation in 2020. Every country makes their plan in several iterations, but once the plan is made, they have to carry out this plan for the rest of the future, let's say till 2100 or so. There are several rounds of, say, negotiation, and the idea is that every new round, each country assumes that the other countries are going to do what they decided in the previous round and announced what is their plan. And then each country for itself optimizes its own strategy based on the previous round's announcement from the other countries. And this goes on until all countries converge to a policy. And countries, when they do optimization, they can either try to optimize egoistically, so they just optimize their own utility, their own happiness, or they can try to optimize the global utility or some intermediate weighted sum of both. So that's the existing model, but now your task is to add geoengineering to this model. Geoengineering is assumed to have an implementation cost, a policy cost, which is relatively modest. So it can be done by one single country, but of course it can also be jointly by several countries. It may reduce climate change, but it may also bring environmental problems. And it is possible that countries are affected in an unequal way by either the benefits or the problems of geoengineering. So I'm hypothesizing that there are at least two possible outcomes, but this will be for you to investigate. So if we have identical countries, I hypothesize that there might still be some free riding dynamics even with the geoengineering, because maybe everybody hopes that someone else is going to bear the cost of geoengineering, which are not super high, but still exist. So we could investigate under which conditions we end up with doing a collective geoengineering versus a collective green transition to green energy. But the really interesting case will be when the countries are not identical, and one country or a group of countries could be tempted to enforce geoengineering unless maybe the others are going to reduce their emissions. So maybe we can replicate this thought experiment by Fabre and Wagner. So this is the ideas which I have in mind, but of course, if you come up with further creative ideas how to understand the effect of geoengineering on international negotiations, this is just a starting point and you can go further from this.
Okay, thank you very much, Claudia. That's the end, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And any questions for Claudia for now? Yeah, there's one question. Francisco, can you just unmute yourself?
Yes. Hi, Claudia. Thank you for your presentation. I was wondering about not so much the project, but more, suppose we make such a model, so either the model that already exists or the extended model, it probably contains some parameters. And how would you fit parameters to make for a realistic model? Like maybe, so if we could extend this model, would it be realistic?
Well, especially for the geoengineering, there is huge uncertainty about, for example, environmental damages which it can bring. So in fact, what should be an aim is to make exactly sensitivity study. So to check for what range of, for example, damages caused by geoengineering would our investigations turn towards geoengineering or towards a green transition. So we don't know yet what are the exact environmental damages of geoengineering, but we can at least explore what influence this parameter has on the outcome.
Okay.
And also it's a stylized model, so indeed it is more to qualitatively understand the possible dynamics of the system and not so much about making a quantitative prediction.
Okay, so if we cannot make a quantitative prediction, would this kind of model in the near future be used for policy prediction, or?
I think it would rather be used to explain to policymakers or fellow scientists or other stakeholders to illustrate the possible dynamics that can arise, for example, to stress the role of collaboration. It would not be to predict exactly what would happen, but to understand what can happen.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Francisco. And any further questions to Claudia? For now, not. And Claudia, have you joined the Slack?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, that'll be great. And if you have further questions, then please ask Claudia and in the Slack channel. And I think this is the end of the kickoff meeting, and especially thank you very much. Thank all the speakers for the fantastic talk. And of course, big thanks to the attendees that's till the end. I think now